Good evening. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Matt. I am your alchemist this evening, and I am here with the wonderful Leslee Sheu. How you doing?
Hello. Good. Good.
That's the quickest that intro has ever happened. I may have forgotten something. I don't know what I've forgotten, if I have forgotten something.
Don't panic. It's all right. I'm excited to be here. I'm a big fan of Matt Waterhouse's books, so I'm thrilled to be here. So.
Well, I'm sure he will be pleased to hear that. Yeah, this is like you're one of the most supportive people of my work, which is really cool.
Oh, really?
And I'm really pleased to meet you. Yeah, well, I mean, particularly so I think we've sort of, because this is mainly like a D&D channel where we sort of branch out into talking to like creative people about various things, maybe about D&D, maybe about some of the things we'll be talking about, which are maybe not as focused on D&D. But the whole novelist side of things hasn't really, it's come up in like some of the interviews, but it's not actually come up in the show itself, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Well, I'm hoping we can talk about it, because.
Oh yeah.
And I need to ask you, can we get a little bit spoilery? Because is that okay? Because there's so much I want to ask you.
Look, Ian spoiled a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, she did.
So it's always fine. It's fine.
Okay, good.
I don't mind. Why put the lid back on it now? It's okay. Out there.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
You said good.
Yeah, but like particularly when like Eye of the Universe came out, you were very supportive of that, and I appreciate that mightily.
So I wasn't the first one. I mean, I learned about it from T. Alex Ratcliffe, the author of Battle Games, and he does video reviews every once in a while of indie books, or books, mostly indie books, because so I saw his review of your book Eye of the Universe, and I was like, that sounds interesting. Like he just really said a lot of good things about it. And even in, like, I wrote down in his written review, he called it it's strangely sad and beautiful in its own grisly way. And I just thought, yeah, nice. That's something I want to check out. So that's one of the, because I was just, I had published pretty recently myself as an indie author, and I was trying to read more indie author. Like, that's the first time I had started reading indie, novels and things, and starting to meet people and try to, see what other people are doing, and also just support other indie authors. And so that was definitely one I put on my list. And then I just was really surprised, because it's not something I would normally pick up. And especially because I used to have this dumb rule where I didn't like to read books that were in first person present tense. Yeah. Like, I would just like put it down if I saw it was going to be that. And it's still not my preferred way, to read a story, but that one, like, just and that's part of my growth, I think, as a reader, since I became an indie author and starting to read other people's work and other styles of writing. I mean, I've been reading all my life, but I think I'm branching out a little more since I'm reading indie books and stuff. And that one was just like, the present, was it present tense first person? It's kind of necessary in that story, and totally works. So.
Well, it's weird you say that, because I also have that bias, I guess. I don't really, in fact, I haven't actually come across many other novels that do it, but it also puts me off, weirdly, when I read a book that.
And why did you write it that? Why did you do that for that story?
I think part of the reason I did it was because, so I did it in Red Saints as well, which is the book before that, for people who don't know.
Which I have read as well.
Boom.
Yeah, that came before? Okay, yes. I didn't realize it came before. Okay. Yeah, I read that one as well.
Yeah, so I did it in, I think because well, it's for different reasons. So in Red Saints, I did it because it's very much because it's the perspective of those two characters who
And you switch
are
back and forth.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
switching back and forth, and it's very much in their heads. So for people who haven't read Red Saints or don't know about it, it's a sci-fi where the two characters in it are essentially a very anarchic serial killer and a and sort of a holy warrior vigilante, not really a vigilante, like a holy warrior sort of military police style thing. It's difficult to describe. I had this problem with Ian. I can't describe my own work at all, but it's very based around their different thoughts and their different attitudes. So I wanted it to be very much in their heads. And with
that works really well. Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. And with Eye of the Universe, it was kind of similar, but also I think with both of them, I found particularly with Red Saints that it added a lot of tension having it in the present tense. Because this is something that I was told years ago because I studied writing at university, and they talked about immediacy. So the feeling that what you're reading is happening right now, basically. And I thought that kind of kind of went like, all right, whatever. But it adds a bit of tension, I think, because there's a subconscious thing when it's written in past tense that this happened and it's being retold. And
so things must have turned out okay or something, or things like somewhat, or I think I know what you mean.
Kind of. Yeah. Well, it adds, it kind of adds almost an authenticity to it. It's a difficult thing to describe, actually. And I don't usually try and describe
it. I think with present tense, it's like, and in first person, I guess, too, you don't know what's happening. Like, it's like you're on the precipice of what's going to happen next, like, in a way. Like, yeah, I see what you mean.
But for something like Eye of the Universe, where that situation is so tense anyway, it added to the I guess it added to kind of the horror of it, and it added to and in a way it kind of added to the whimsy, sort of, because there is a bit of whimsy in it, just a sprinkle.
Definitely.
And because it's all about like a mental state, it's something that needed to, I think, be done in that way.
Yeah, I don't know which book to ask you about first, or because I have so many thoughts on both of those books, mostly on Eye of the Universe, because what you're talking about, the mental state of, because it's, it's about there's a narrator. It took me a while, like I think this is a man or a young man. It took me a while to figure that out, I think. But I'm pretty sure it's a young man.
It's funny that everyone thinks that. And I'm not saying people are wrong, but I purposely didn't say.
Yeah, and I know. And I went back like in the middle, I'm like, wait a minute. I think he had a family member, like a sister, and his protectiveness, or I'm just gonna say he, because that's sort of how I interpreted it.
It's fine.
But and just the strength that it would take to climb up a rope. Isn't he using like ropes and pulleys to get up these shafts? And he's literally pulling a dead man in a wheelchair up the shaft. So like, I was like, this feels kind of like you need some strength. So I don't know. Not that a woman can do that, but especially, well, anyway, so back to, let me not get into that, but back to the mental state, because I was telling some people last year, I read this book last year. It was like my favorite indie book I read last year. And I was telling everyone that, and some other indie author friends I kind of made, and I was trying to tell them about it. I said, so there's the mental state of the character, right? But who is made friends with a dead man because he's on a crippled cruise ship, and it's like, this huge ship, and he's trying, everyone's seen might be dead, and he woke up and like all this stuff. And when you get to the beginning, when you start the book, he is already has this person in a wheelchair who's dead that he is taking with him everywhere as he's trying to survive and find other survivors and go through every deck of the ship, right? Which is like scary and dark, and like I really like the atmosphere, and the way you did that in that book is really kind of, I felt that. So but so he's already in this head, and he will talk to the dead person, right? So that's his headspace. But I was telling my people I was talking to about it that my headspace as a reader kind of went through a journey, because and this would be like in the first few chapters of the book, because at first I'm like, he's going up a shaft, he's rigged up pulleys to bring his friend with him, who is a heavy dead body in a wheelchair. And this is like, I just started reading, I'm like, why are you doing this? You're trying to survive on a ship. You got to think about survival. Like, don't drag this dead body around with you. It's like, what are you doing? Leave it behind. Go. You'd be up all these decks in a day if you didn't have to do this. And so that was my first thought as I was reading it. And then pages or chapters later, I was like, he's been talking to this guy for a while, and having one-way conversation, and it's lonely, and like you never know what is around the corner. I'm like, okay, in my mind, I'm telling the character, I'm like, okay, you can bring him with you. That's fine. Just like leave him behind if you need to like go up a ladder. Just like don't make it too hard on yourself, right? But I can understand why you got this sort of guy you're carrying around. And then like even more chapters later, or not too soon later, I'm like, no, because then at some point you find out the guy's name is Ziggy. You find out his background, and then it's like my thought as a reader is like, no, you can't leave him behind. Like, I understand why you're dragging him everywhere with you, even though that makes things tough. And in my mind, like they were friends, and like there's a reason for that and stuff. And then, but again, it's like, if you pause and think about it, it's a dead man in a wheelchair. And like, and I guess to spoil it a little bit, the way, when we do find Ziggy's quarters and his logs, and the narrator is able to take the computer files and program them and rig up a voice box for Ziggy, and then they can actually talk to each other. And then it's like, as a reader, I'm like, you get in this like rhythm of they're actually having conversations, and it's really real. Like, and then you stop and think, and it's like there's all these layers, because Ziggy, when he was alive, was having his own one-way conversation with a computer when he was making his logs. So when he was alive, he was having a one-way conversation, and now the narrator is kind of still having a one-way conversation, but it appears to be a two-way conversation because of the way it's rigged. So it's like, I just thought that was like amazing, and really, and at that point, I really cared about those two characters, and like, and because you get some of Ziggy's backstory, you get the narrator's backstory, and I don't know, I just thought it was really layered in the psychology of it, and that's on top of the survival and the horror aspect. I just really like that aspect of that book a lot. So,
right, thank you for saying so. And
sorry, I just rambled about it.
No, it's all good. It's all good. It actually brings up kind of an interesting, because I mentioned in the interview I did with Ian that I changed the ending of it.
Yeah, I wanted to. Yeah.
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 The other thing, because you said like it begins with them together, basically. It begins with him. I'll call him as well, just for ease. It begins with him and the dead guy already having. They already have that kind of one-way conversation happening. I chopped off probably I would imagine it would have been sort of maybe 4 or 5 or maybe more chapters from the beginning of the main character getting on the Persephone and like having
Wow.
some interaction with his sister, and then going into the pod, and then waking up and everything's chaos, and he's alone, and then he finds Ziggy, and then he starts pushing him. I chopped all of that off because part of the reason I kind of chopped it off to add more. I think it added more kind of depth, maybe, for the reader and for the character to lead up to that moment near the end where you find out what happened to Ziggy.
I just read that scene last night because I was revisiting some of the stuff, and I had forgotten, like, the scene where Ziggy's is talking and he has turned off the voice commands, so you can't make him stop talking, and he's starting to talk about what he's about to do, and that's when you're starting to find out what happened to Ziggy. And that really affected me even when I was reading it last night, and what you're talking about, because it was like just really like this moment of like, that's how he found him. He found him right after that happened. And I'm glad to hear that you chopped off all those chapters, because I think that moment, like, I mean, still you probably still would have found out, like, you wouldn't have known how Ziggy died, but having him find him in the beginning, like, I think I like it better the way, like, did you have someone read it and they suggested that, or you just suddenly had this epiphany that I need to chop this off? And because I think that was a really good decision.
I sort of came to that. I think I started writing. So what I tend to do, I go through. I have like a plan, like a full bullet point plan of what I'm going to do. And I think I started writing the first chapter and then went, I think I need to, because then I sort of had the almost epiphany of, it sort of played out like a movie. So like, it's like lights up and you hear the squeak of the wheelchair and you hear the footsteps and it's him pushing the dead guy, and that's how it would start. I'm like, that's a better start than, oh no, all this stuff is happening. We have to leave this planet. We're leaving the planet. And also it introduces Ziggy as introduces him as a corpse, as something just inert. If I'd introduced him, like, if I'd introduced the main character finding him.
Yeah.
And so it's already in the reader's head then, this person is dead. And I kind of thought that it might make people like not invest as much in Ziggy. Because when I think introducing him already as part of this almost codependent, or definitely very dependent relationship. Well, yeah, codependent, because he can't get around otherwise.
Right.
Even though he doesn't know it. Introducing him as part of that, attach it, I guess, kind of sort of attaches him more to the character and attaches him more to the reader. And
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I'm really glad you made that decision.
And also that scene toward the end, like it made me change the ending. Partly, like writing that made me go like, oh no, I can't end this the way I was going to end it, because it would have been too much. I'm like, too much after all this. Yeah.
I heard you talking to Ian about how you changed the ending and how it was pretty hopeless. The first version was pretty grim, but then like you kind of added this. There's this sense of hope. I think that's what T. Alex liked about it. That's what I like about it. The ending was one of my favorite things about it. I said that in my review of it, because and this is where it gets spoilery. And last year I wouldn't talk about what happened at the end because I thought it'd be too spoilery, and it's such a great reveal. But the fact that I mean, there's so much emotional stuff that happens at the end, and then you don't know really what happens to him, but you find out that you know, he went through a lot to his main goal was to get some beacons going, right? I guess distress signal.
Yeah.
Because like the top half of the ship is destroyed, and like the main way you would do that is off in space somewhere. So he had to find a different way to do that. Excuse me. So what was I getting to? Oh, so you find, and this is spoilery, but you find out that eventually, and this is not from the narrator's point of view, but you find out from someone else's point of view later that they did finally discover the ship because they heard the distress signal, and they. This is so spoilery, but so sorry, because they find 106 survivors, and throughout the whole book, the narrator and Ziggy never encountered them, and then you're like, first of all, that's like the ship is massive. You already kind of know that, but then you really know it because you can go through this whole ship and not encounter these other survivors, and then it's like there's so many scenarios because you know, they knew someone had sent the distress signal, but they can't tell. The survivors are so weak that, you know, they don't really have any information yet. So you don't know if the narrator is among the survivors, and all these amazing scenarios. Like he could have. I just have this whole list of like, after, you know, his part ends in the book, and I won't spoil that, but like he could have died right away because he was in kind of bad condition. He could have encountered some survivors and survived together. He could have encountered some survivors and they kill him because some of them were crazy. You know, he could have not been one of the survivors that was found. You know, like there's all these. It kind of lets the reader's imagination go, and like I really like that. And there was hope at the end that, and he saved those people pretty much. So that was a hopeful thing. I don't know where you plan to end it. Like, just was it because, you know, the narrator tried to almost commit suicide too. So like, was that going to be in it, or do you remember?
No, I think the main change. So the main change came from. We're in spoiler territory anyway, so it's fine.
I'm sorry.
It's cool. It's all right. Ian opened the door. Blame Ian. It's so. I think it was the gun. I think that's probably where I started thinking about changing it, because he uses the gun earlier on to do something cool. And so I had that as a potential method for him to top himself at the end, but he didn't have any bullets because he's run out of bullets.
Which is a cool reason, but I won't give that away, I guess.
And prior to this, the gun, I introduced the gun way earlier, and it didn't come up again until that point. So prior to that, there were never any bullets in the gun, and he just didn't know. But when the cool part came up, I was like,
that wasn't part of the original, the cool part?
No. I was like, there need to be some bullets in this gun to get him where he needs to go. So I was like, okay, there are bullets. Okay, so there are bullets in the gun. So when it came to the very end, how it originally ended was there's the after action report from the guy who finds the ship, and it mentioned it, and they don't find any survivors, was the original ending. But they find people who had all been like hooked up to voice boxes and things, conversing with each other in like a circle in the observation lounge. And I thought, I think it got to that point. I think the change with the gun made me go like, this person is okay. So we've now established this person's pretty resourceful, and he's got no bullets in the gun because he used the gun to move forward, basically. And I thought, not only would Ziggy not want him to kill himself, he's used the. I think it would have been too much of an insult in a way to have him do it, and it would have meant more for him to actually move on, because I think the entire thing really is him coming to terms with what's happened and him having to move on, and coming to terms with losing his sister and coming to terms with this whole situation, because it's like an interstellar war and his life has been upended. And then it's, okay, what do I do now? And I think that ending it there with, okay, what do I do now? And then having it be worth it is where is where it needed something. Because I was like, I think I'm good up to here, and I need to work out here where it's gonna go. So this happens with me all the time. Plans change like constantly.
Right? But it changes for the better. I mean, that sounds
Yeah.
so much better to me. I think it's good that you had that insight before you published, it's good that you could look at it and see those areas of improvement and like literal, not only plot changes, but how it changes the tone and what it means, and just the whole fact, like you said, to make it all worth it, and that gives for the reader, it hits a little better at home about it being all worth it. Like reading the whole book was worth it. You know what I mean? Like going through this whole journey, and like if it had ended the way you originally thought, I probably would have been like, a little disappointed probably. But instead I got a really good feeling. Sorry, yeah, it would have been a bad punch in the gut. Not sometimes with reading stories, some punches in the gut can be good, but this would have been a low blow, I think.
Especially coming after the Ziggy stuff. Coming after that, it would have been way too much.
Can I put you on the spot though, because I have a question.
Okay.
So in Ian's video review of the book, she kind of brought it up, and I hadn't really thought about this, but like, why couldn't Ziggy have been included in the group of people found at the end around the table? I mean, I have a theory, my own theory as for my reading of it, but she was like, and I went back and looked at the sequence of events, because it's again spoiler territory, but like the way that the narrator has to come to terms with the fact that Ziggy is actually a dead body, and and he has the whole, he ends up burying him and kind of like puts that to rest in a way, says goodbye. So for him to be part of the group that were embalmed later, he would have had to dig him up, probably. But I think she even mentions that, like, why not dig him up and add him and let him live on with some friends, that sort of thing. So I have my own thoughts on that, but I was wondering if you had ever if you listened to her review and like what that made you think.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So it wouldn't have added Ziggy to the group at the end because Ziggy's dead. Like, he's really dead. Because the point, because at this point, he's come to terms with Ziggy being dead.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that was my thought as well.
Like,
and that was a hard thing to come to terms with.
Yeah. Well, it's not just, in a way, it's not just Ziggy, I guess. At that point, it's also his sister, and it's also kind of everything else.
Yeah.
I think, but that doesn't remove him That doesn't remove from him the desire not to be alone. So, and he can kind of because he has the resources, he has the knowledge now, he can do that. And it's also like, you'd think in my sort of head, it would have been, he sets up the beacons, and then it's a long wait for something to show up. So
you're saying he might have actually kind of hung out at that table, like, that he still doesn't want to be alone. So it would have taken a lot. It also gives him a project to do while he's waiting.
Yeah, it's
because that was like 17 people that he had to embalm and set up and do the programming for their logs, the voice boxes. The one quibble I had was like, he was on the brink. He was starting to be really malnourished. Like, would he physically be able to do that? But maybe he found some food or something, like somewhere. Yeah. But you could guess that. But
that
are you
also
saying
kind of
that's part of it? Go ahead.
Oh,
yeah.
I would say it also denotes like the passage of time. Like, he had time to do this with 17 other people before
that's
something arrived.
That's a really good way to do. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. What a great book. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad, but gosh darn it, Leslie, this isn't about me. This is about you. So now that we're done with the part of the interview where you interview me, let's talk a little bit about Kumasagi, because that is the series name, right? I've got
yes.
Kumasagi, yeah.
So
I've read all 3 of the books so far, and I saw on Instagram, I think you put up a picture of some of like the original things you did on floppy disks.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So this has been in the works for a long time. This series. All right, so where was the beginning? And what is Kumasagi for people who are not aware of Kumasagi?
Sure. Hang on, my nose is actually a little warm. So I think like I have trouble as well describing it, my own work, right? But one way to answer,
I think in your case there's a reason for that, because I think you kind of have to get into the world, and it's so different from almost anything I've read. It's very, very different. I'm like, ooh. And it's very different. It's very gripping. So sorry, I cut you off, Karen.
No, that's good. That's good. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Unless it makes it hard to get into, but I mean, it might for some people. But I could probably answer both questions at once by saying it's easier for me to describe it if I say how the idea started, I guess. So
yeah.
So I'm a bit older. So I went to college in like the early 90s. So I went to art school. And the art school I went to, which is SCAD, which is Savannah College of Art and Design, they had, and they probably still have, I assume, a sequential art program. So it's comic books. You could major in comic books.
Okay.
They call it sequential art. So I was a computer art major, but I had a huge interest in comic books. I was a comic book reader, wanted to make comic books and stuff. And so some of my elective classes were in that program, the sequential art program. So I took a script writing class, and for comics. And one of the short stories I wrote for that was about and don't ask me why I wrote a story about this, but it was about a girl that was born in a world where there's only boy children, like male children, but she was the only girl. So it was like this whole thing or whatever. And I don't even remember why. So, but the character kind of stuck with me, and this was in 1994. So yeah, there was like floppies and stuff like that. But I was going to make it a comic book, and I started developing it her story and like all this stuff, but then and I'm not really can't draw and fast enough or competently enough to do comics. So I was like, but you know, I've been reading my whole life. I always wanted to write novels as well. So I'm like, I'm going to make this, try this as a book. So I started writing the book in 1998, and I wrote that whole prologue about her birth. So like spoiler, that baby that's born at the beginning is a girl. So, but this is a world that only has male children. So it's like, so I was developing those ideas, and I got really interested in, I was going to have a little like 3-page backstory of her parents and this uncle character. She has an uncle. I got really interested in the uncle character who is Najat. And I started, and so I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a trilogy, and the first one's called Kumasagi. It's going to be one book. It's going to be about the uncle. That's a good intro to the world. The second 2 books will be about his niece. Okay, so this character who will come later. So I started concentrating on the uncle and his whole thing. You know, because he has his own story. He's, you know, he's the sort of mystical person. He has abilities to help people who are dying and things like. I had a lot of influence from, you know, I was kind of studying Tibetan Buddhism at the time, and I had traveled to Nepal and India, so I was kind of bringing in those influences and starting to build up on that. And then so his story and, you know, sort of this romance he had with Asta started to grow and grow, and the world started to grow, and it became a lot more than 3 pages, or it became a lot more than one book, I should say. And I'm like, this is going to be more than one book. So I'm just like, let me concentrate on this Kumasagi, make it a book series, and tell Najat and Asta's story. And then hopefully I'll be able to finish that and get to the part I really meant to write about, which is Asta's daughter. So like, so it became something that kind of was supposed to be one book, but became, but anyway, I'm not explaining the story very well, but he, yeah, part of it is kind of the world building, I guess, where there's, you know, it actually takes place on another planet. So
yeah, this is what I figured.
Yeah. So some people have told me they think it's sci-fi. I've kind of marketed it as fantasy. I'm not really sure, but
I would say it's more fantasy than sci-fi. Although there's some my brain fills in a bit of sci-fi here and there with the Iodina and things like.
Yeah. So is that mystical? Is that sci-fi? You know. So yeah. So there's this planet. There's sort of this extra dimensional being that floats around in the atmosphere and comes and visits, and it's called the Iodina, or they call it the skyfish sometimes. They're originally an aquatic society. They lived underwater, but they've sort of evolved to live on land. But the women, the females of this race are still born from the water, right? They are born from these pods in these sacred lakes, and they're born fully grown. So the females are still, so it's still kind of has those aquatic characteristics to the species, right? You know, they have scales on their wrists. They have like a latent fin ridge, things like that. That's where that comes from. But the Iodina, which is this like sort of, it's actually just this kind of space alien, but it lives in their atmosphere, and it will drop the Shaktis, which are like the living sparks that will go into the women when they're born and kind of gives them a spark of life. So the people on the ground have sort of a relationship with that entity who's really just there, like dropping seeds, and then you know, they return when they die, kind of thing. I don't think it really has a consciousness of lording over them or being a god or anything. It's just kind of there, living by instinct. But for them, it's like it's a sacred thing. So,
well, it's right for worship, isn't it? It's like the mother in the sky, kind of. This thing that appears and births all of these women from the lakes and from the ocean.
Yeah, it's like the life giver. Yeah, definitely.
And it's right for worship. And it's just it's really fascinating. It's one of the most unique worlds I've read. It's very like, it's just, and it's what I really appreciate about it is that it's not impenetrable, because it's very unique, and you put in a lot of terminology and you just have it there, like the way they kind of like the way they address each other with like sati for wife, I think.
For like, that would be like a ma'am, like a sir and ma'am. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, like the formal wife, and then sat would be
just
like the formal,
sir.
Yeah. Things like that.
Yeah.
You just have that in there, but it's clear enough, and it's kind of, it's presented clearly enough, so you're like, okay, I understand what they're saying, and it's
from the context or something.
From the context. From the context, and like the ranks and things, like the amalas, it's kind of immediately obvious what they are and what their role is.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. Because I don't know, you never know, like, well, if it's understandable or not.
Well, it's the difficult thing of wanting to make something that unique and also make it understandable. And it's one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about, was that world building and how that world kind of came to be, because it is so unique.
Well, it came to be because I had to answer questions, and to myself, and it started with this pretty dumb story about a girl who's like in a world full of boys, like, an outcast or whatever, which I'm not even like interested in that part of the story anymore. But then I had to be like, why? Okay, there's mothers, like, where do they come from? They didn't have, why aren't there any female children? So then you're like, so I had to start answering those questions and coming up with how that works. And like, so I was like, I came up with these women are born from pods in the lake, and I wanted to make that a sacred thing. I was definitely influenced by Anne McCaffrey and the Pern series, the Dragon Rider books. The dragons when they're born, are impressed upon a human. Like there's a mental connection that happens, right? So I was thinking, and these women, they're fully grown. So, okay, so I have to answer the question. Sorry. Okay, how can they speak? How do they know how to speak, or whatever? How do they know things? So I came up with this idea that there's these holy women called amalas. Sorry, I have a frog in my throat.
That's so good.
It always, like, if I start talking, like,
it jumps up.
Yeah.
Sea frog.
So I was like, there's these women who are holy, who have the ability to have an initiation with you, and sort of a mind meld, I guess you could say, where the women are born, but they need they're like they have the spark, their bodies are moving, but they need, their consciousness is just like, boom, like, I need something to attach to and to feed on, and to get the, this, like, to become cognizant, I guess. So the amalas are these women who can do that. And but it's a little dangerous, because if it's not an amala, and I was actually also a little bit influenced by the Star Trek episode, Star Trek: The Next Generation. There's this episode with there's like this alien woman who's in a pod, and she's like betrothed to, I have to look up the name of that episode. She's betrothed to, this total aside, but she's a betrothed to this like, you know, dignitary because of a political marriage. And it, once she comes out of the pod, she's going to impress upon the person she's betrothed to.
Is
and
this
like
Famke
become,
Janssen?
it's from Star Trek.
Yeah, but is the
Yeah.
actress Famke Janssen?
Yes, 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 yes.
I know
Yes.
exactly what you mean.
Yeah, that's her. And like, and she was so beautiful. Oh my gosh, in that episode. And like, of course she falls in love with Picard, like, because she opens too early, and like, you know, that sort of thing. It's a different story, but I must have got the pod thing from there, you know, and but that was a really interesting story. So
yeah. But from
the
I
idea
guess,
that,
from there as well, the question becomes, okay, well, if they're in pods underwater, how do you get the pods? And I guess maybe where the divers come from.
Yeah, so the pods are actually they are plants. They're just straight up a big holy plant. I mean, a lot of the things are like sacred, that it has sort of a mystical aspect, but it's a aquatic plant that has the pods growing out of it, big human-sized pods. You know, they start out small and stuff. So that's just a plant, and that's part of their earth. And that's why the Iodina is coming around, because it's attracted to those plants and knows, like, there's just this cycle of life that's happening, right?
Yeah.
And part of it is the earth-based, and part of it is like extra-dimensional alien, and it's like this cycle, symbiotic relationship kind of thing. But yeah, so going back to the mental thing, like, so if they're born and they don't, if an omelet isn't there, it can be kind of dangerous. Like, you don't want to have just any person who can't handle it. And of course, our main character, Najat, accidentally gets mixed up with one of them, and they have the term is called when the omelet and the newborn woman meet, and, you know, do that whole sort of initiation, it's called a diksha. And so he accidentally does that with one of the women, and it's just like, it can destroy your mind, basically, both of them. But the omelet saves them in time, and it only partially happens. So so that's sort of where their bond comes from, and they don't really know they have a bond for a while. And then there's a case of mistaken identity, because he has a brother, and he's the only one with a brother, because they also only have single children, which is a whole nother thing. But she ends up marrying his brother. So
the brother. Oh, the brother. It's so there's a lot going. So I mean, there's a lot going on in these. So it's very kind of, it's got the sort of fantasy aspect, the kind of sci-fi sprinkle, maybe. That's very Shakespearean, of like the case of mistaken identity, and this sort of love triangle, sort of, a bit, but not.
Yeah.
And
I don't think it's a love triangle, because I don't think Jay and Anasta belong together, or even love each other. Like, they don't really. He's not really.
Yeah, this is the thing. This is the whole thing. Yeah, with Jayan and Jayan. This is the thing, right? One of the things that makes it so, part of what makes the world compelling, and part of what makes it so engaging and easy to kind of absorb, kind of immerse into, is that it's very grounded in the characters that inhabit it. And you are very good at writing very flawed people. And oh boy, they are flawed people. When I read so the second, so we're kind of talking about Destin, which is the first of the first
which
one.
By the way, most people who have read only the first one tell me Jane is their favorite character. And I'm like, and then I have to tell, I can't keep my mouth shut.
That guy.
So go ahead. I want to know what you think, because you've read them all. So.
Yeah. I think I'm up to date, right? Wife was the third?
Yeah. The third one is Wife, yeah.
Right.
I'm working on the fourth, but it's taking a while.
So Jayan is like, he's like this. He's this mad. He's this sort of like he strikes me sort of. He's like a wanderlust mad academic, but he's sort of this like, I'm a leaf on the wind, man. I just want to go out there and I just want to see things. And I got a wife because that's what I was kind of supposed to do, but you know, I would rather kind of just be away and like doing whatever. And she'll be fine. She'll be fine. She doesn't have any money, but she'll be fine because I didn't add it to my account. And it's
my God, you picked up on that. That's the first time anyone's
like,
mentioned that to me.
I was just reading it like, dude, why did you get married? And it's just because it's what you're supposed to do. And it's like you and it's so like, it's this sense of it being so like, it's almost like a childish way to say it, but it's so unfair that's the marriage that happened, because there's this other person there who they have that connection. They have the connection through sort of accidental and dangerous means, but they have that connect, and also that's sort of a flaw in Najat, that he's not entirely being honest with Asta about having. I won't spoil. I will not spoil. But he's not being honest with her, kind of, because of what's going on.
He's afraid to lose that. He's afraid to lose that connection because he's been told his whole life that, because he's the second son, which there aren't any really. It's a rare thing, and they're supposed to be kind of like, what do you call it? They're supposed to be what's the word when you're like infertile, like not
impotent or infertile.
Impotent or something, yeah. And he's been told growing up that, you know, he's the second son or whatever. And when he falls for Asta, partly, you know, because they have this accidental bond, and he finds out, oh, I'm like any other guy. I have these feelings. I have these, you know, you can infer that his body would work just fine if they had that circumstance. But he's afraid to lose that, because he's afraid that what if it's true with, you know, when the others find out and they're like, this is the only reason you have feelings for her is because you have this connection that you, and he's a little bit afraid that once that's solved and they don't, because they kind of need to break that connection, because he knows that, because he's got something of her she needs back. And he's an upstanding guy, so he kind of knows that, but he's just like, he's clinging to it a little bit because he's afraid, you know, once we solve that problem, this is all going to end. And I'm, you know, what if I don't really have feeling? What, you know, there's just a lot of like, you know, that kind of hesitation, and that's why he's clinging to it a little bit. But
yeah, I mean, it's also like, but he's clinging to this sort of, it's almost like he's clinging to a feeling of like longing, which is really like, oh, don't do that. That's probably going to end badly. Well, it's probably.
So he knows that. And in the fourth book, that's gonna come to a head. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's an upstanding guy. He's not going to cling to that forever. He knows, you know, she needs, I don't know. I don't want to spoil too much, but yeah. Oh, but totally. I will say, Jayan didn't just marry her because it's what you're supposed to do, but he's hiding from something. He's trying to.
That's true.
Something happened to him, and he's trying to. That scared him pretty bad, and he's like trying to avoid it, and that he tried to think he could settle down, and that would kind of absolve his need to deal with it. He got married because he thought that was part of settling down. His wanderlust caused him to still go somewhere, you know, so he's not handling that very well. He's like, you know, maybe if I have a wife, that'll, you know, shield me from some things that are out there that
yeah
I you know,
I actually forgot about that, But yeah, definitely don't work, because that's another thing. We don't want to spoil that either, because
Okay.
that's But this is, I feel like, I almost don't want to touch wife at all in this chat, because because it's sort of dependent on what happens in Destin and Kandagiri. But Kandagiri, I want to talk about a little bit, because this was where, like, the flawed people all kind of got put in a pot and, like, just stirred up, and I was just like, oh no, because I was.
Is that bad? Is that?
No, it was great.
Okay.
It was great.
Okay.
Because of how it went, because of how it ended up. It was great, because I was like, because I found myself liking. I found myself liking the character of Padilla. I think the sort of explorer, another kind of explorer guy, and then I found myself not liking him at all. So I was like, oh, you're not in this for, you're just kind of doing this for your own kind of mad, almost ego, and the other, and bringing the. It's a whole thing. It would be too spoilery. I can't talk about it too much. But, like, he's brought his kid along on this obviously dangerous thing. I'm like, what? Don't bring the kid. But he has to bring the kid, kind of, because of some other stuff going on.
Yeah, he needed to bring the kid. So yeah, I worry about that a little bit, and I think I realized it after I wrote the whole thing and published it, that because I like Pidir, his crew likes him, a lot of people like him, but I realized how flawed he is, and like, and I really like the last, personally, I mean, I'm the author, so I wanted that last chapter to be emotional to what happens to him, but then I realized later, like, maybe the reader doesn't really care, because he's pretty flawed, and he really shouldn't be doing this to begin with. He's just putting everyone in danger, and, like, but then to me, I worried that I messed that up, because I made him too, if you really look at him, he's pretty flawed, but at the same time I wanted him to be someone that readers would like, but maybe it doesn't work out that way.
Well, he's not. This is the thing. He's a likable guy. I mean, he's like a very. The thing is, he's a very authentic character. I think this is part of why, like, when I say I don't like him, he frustrates me. You know what I mean? It's him who's, because he's this very enthusiastic, very infectious, very passionate guy. He's brought his son. He clearly cares about his son. He's brought his son with him to get away from something worse in his mind. Right. And it's difficult, and you can't. It's difficult to say whether he's right or right. He's probably right in that regard, to bring the son with him as opposed to having the son there. But he's on this. He's on this fool. It's like a fool's errand almost. What he wants to do is so mental.
We should probably explain what it is that they're there for.
So he wants to. He wants to try and ride this thing called a lopperbeak, which is a giant bird, a giant murder bird that has no qualms about eating people or each other. They're like this giant. It's like Jaws in the air. It's this. But there's a guy who, in Kandagiri, which is the place, there's a guy in Kandagiri who can control them, and if he can control them, then we can ride them, and if we can ride them, then profits. Like, we can ride, not profits, but if you can ride them, then, like, you can get places. I mean, I'm inferring something. You can get places quicker. You can explore further. You can do all kinds of things. I mean, like, if it's the benefit. It's like it's like almost like Icarus. It's like a man trying to fly. And it's like you don't like in the parable of Icarus, you don't hate Icarus, but what you realize that what he's doing is like, it's like, it's again, it's like, it's almost like the Shakespearean tragedy, because it's like this, and particularly when you meet the guy who can control these things, who is not stable, and there's some stuff going on with his wife. And it's just like, oh, this is going to go horribly wrong. And I can't turn away. It's like, it's, I'm reading it. I can't stop reading it. I know this isn't going to end. Oh, but it's so good. It's so well done.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And I
Thank you.
immediately read Wife after that.
Oh,
I
cool.
was like, because I had
It's
them
different.
both, and yeah, Wife is very different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I won't touch Wife.
All right.
I'm hovering around Kandagiri a bit. Like, I don't know how much I can say. I may have said too much. I may have not said enough. I don't know. But it's great fun.
It takes them a while to get there, though. People have told me like the first half is kind of the journey to get down there. But I kind of wanted to get to know some of the characters along the way, and all that crazy stuff doesn't really happen until later. And I worry about that as the author, like.
Well, there's foreshadowing as well for later stuff.
Yeah, I tried to do that.
Yeah, where you establish a few things that kind of that come back later in a big way. And yeah, I mean, it's good to kind of, it's just like it's like the world opens up in Kandagiri, I'd say. Like in the first.
Oh, you know what I should. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, like in Destin, it's very much set in that city, in Shakti Lake City, and then in Kandagiri we go and we open up the world.
That actually happened as I was writing it, because what Kandagiri was supposed to be, and I kind of have this need to tell the story chronologically. And remember, like, I started out telling a story about someone who isn't even born yet at this time. So like there's characters in her part of the story, right? So Sopan, who's the son of Padir, I was just gonna put in like he needs to see something bad happen to his dad, because that's going to affect him. I mean, I knew what it was going to be, which is like these giant murder birds, and he was going to witness this, and I thought it would be like 3 pages, you know. And it turned into 11 chapters, because the characters that he, you know, why are they down there, and you know what, and there wasn't even a town down there when I first had that concept. Like they just went to a cliff because that's where the birds live. But then on the journey, I'm like, well, there's probably more Amalas. You know, I knew there were, and I'm like, well, this is an opportunity to kind of meet some of them along the way. There's, why not have an Amala all the way down there near the Lopperbeaks, you know, because there's a whole town and society of people being born there under the danger of the Lopperbeak. So that started to explode, and it became a whole book pretty much, but it wasn't supposed to be. And then it ended up a couple of characters are going to be important later, you know, like I just started, it was really cool for me. It's kind of a detour from Najat and Asta's story. But I'm glad that it's there, because it did open up the world and gave you more of what that world is, and you know, things, I don't know.
Well, it opens up Jayan as well, and you get more Jayan, and you get to see him. He's sort of in his element during that, and in Wife later on. But where he is, it's like him, and he's going on this adventure. He's like, yeah, this is me, this is my life. And I've got my friend with me, and I've got these students with me who I have to take, and we're going, and it's great. It's like I've scammed the university, into going on this adventure.
I'm so glad you picked up on those little things, because like no one has said that, it's just cool to see that, hear someone say that they saw that about him, that he's like, I really want to do this, but I have a commitment somewhere else. So how can I scam my way out of that commitment? So he's really like, he's gonna maneuver so that things suit him, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. And I know so many people like that. It's like, it's so relatable, kind of, because I think everyone has someone like that somewhere in their existence who can just move the pieces how they want, and they go, okay,
and not seem like they're doing it either.
Yes.
Like, I know some people like that, so that's probably where that came from.
Well, it's like the world building stuff is a fascinating thing for me as a DM for doing like D&D and for role playing games in general, because there's always a question of where to begin with things like that, and where to begin with the story in general, and what the best way of doing that is. And there really isn't one. It's just whatever works, I think, because it seems like with Kumasagi, you started with the characters first, or I guess maybe the concept first of a girl being born the only girl being born in with all boys,
which isn't even part of Kumasagi now.
Which isn't even part of it yet.
Yeah.
It will be, but yeah.
So it was a concept, but I got interested in the characters, but then you have to build a world around the characters, so give them some place to live and why, and I don't know, a lot of it was just solving questions to, you have to start answering why or where or how, and it just kind of springs out of that and kind of thing.
Well, Red Saints began with the characters. Well, it began with the idea of I want to write a story with two antagonists
that
were also kind of protagonists.
Oh my god!
But with two antagonists.
Exactly, they're like two antagonists, and that's exactly why. Like, I was okay. So that answers my question, because that book for me is really good at, because it tells it goes back and forth between their points of view, and they are both monsters, like straight up. But there's moments where you're sympathetic to them a little bit, like just the story, the way it's, because what's his name, Alnaris, or Jake, I guess, does he go by Jake? I don't know.
Question mark.
Yeah, the question mark guy, the serial killer.
We can call him Alnaris.
Okay, because that's what Janus calls him, Saint Janus, who is the other antagonist.
Yeah.
And I was really fascinated with Saint Janus and the whole suit of armor, and you're not allowed to see who's inside. They go by the they pronoun because you're not allowed to even know their gender. Like, the voices change through the helmet. Like, so, and it's very like it's like a religious thing almost, like their whole, and so that was fascinating. And sometimes I was like, I would get sympathetic to these characters and what they're going through, because this person wants to hunt down this serial killer, but then something happens, and I'm not going to say what, but it's like, did you just really do that? And you're such a zealot that you just really did something to someone who did not deserve it, And then on the other side, the serial killer, the question mark guy, who at first I was questioning, did he do all that? And this book is really like, it's like it's gory. Like it's hard to read. Not you see like it afterwards, like you don't see it happening, but you'll see like the aftermath of things that have happened, people being murdered and stuff. And like I was like, man, that's like, and I was like, but the way it was written when you're first introduced to him, it's like, is he the one who did that or not? Because maybe it's someone else and we're just being misled and stuff. But then it's like later you find out, oh, he's that guy and he has his reasons, and he saw some really messed up things. And so you have some so it's like sympathy. There was just another moment with him where I was like, where I was kind of getting roped into this sympathy for him and his situation. And then he did something really bad to someone who didn't deserve it. I don't know if, I don't want to say what it is, because that moment was a gut punch, like we talked about. Like it was a punch to the gut. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I think I do. I think I do.
He comes up behind someone, and let's just say, because I wasn't expecting it at all because of the way he's talking. And you believe him, like kind of getting her sympathy and stuff, and like it's like, and then there's just this huge punch to the gut, and then when he does do it, and I'm like, this guy's a monster, and then you remember that, and then you're like, so I was wondering if that was part of your, if that was intentional to kind of play with the reader's sympathy for these characters or not.
Sort of, yeah. It's like, I think it's the thing about having two antagonists is that it's easy to have sympathy for them if it's from their point of view, and then go, but you can't forget what they are, and it's
that
like
whole book is like,
yeah,
especially those two moments I'm talking about. But yeah,
I mean,
so, yeah, was that intentional? Was that almost like an exercise for you that you wanted to, like?
Well, it was sort of an experiment in a way, and then I was like, actually, I think this could be something, because it started out with an idea for a character that I was going to roleplay with Lee and Carl, actually, who are on the channel. It was a sci-fi universe, and the character I sort of played around with was the question mark serial killer character. Now I expanded him outside of that. I was like, okay, so that's what this character is, and this is what he's capable of. And it's like, ooh, and putting him against, it's really, it's sort of like the battle between almost like a very toxic authoritarianism and a very toxic libertarianism. It's like the polar opposites on that political window nonsense. It's like they're dead up and down, and what happens when these two clash?
Oh my gosh!
And
yeah.
And how is it going to resolve itself? Is it going to? It's not going to end well, probably for either of them. So how is it going to, like? How is it going to end for them? It was a whole thing. But in a novel, you can do that. In a novel, you can go, okay, we'll start with this character or this set of characters, and from there we'll build around them. And I feel like on a tabletop, you can't really do that. You sort of have to have some idea of the world that you're going to plonk these people in, and then the story kind of comes out around the characters. But where they inhabit has to kind of be at least solid in concept, and a big part of it has to be solid. Like the ground they initially walk on has to be solid.
Can you add to that as you play the game? Like if they go towards the boundaries of that world, do you have to add something on the fly, or is it like you have to have those boundaries and that's it?
Well, the idea is like this is like before the game even starts. You've got this sort of set area of land, or this set area of play, and then from there, their characters are going to be sort of creating the story along with you, kind of being there as well. They're creating this story, and from there, that world goes like that, and then it goes wider, and then it goes wider, and then eventually, eventually it would be like a planet, I guess.
But do you, as the DM, know the wider parts? Or are you, as the DM, discovering that along with the players?
It sort of, it kind of depends, actually. I think, yes. Well, okay. So in some of the ones that I'm doing at the moment, yes, I had a clear idea of the world and the powers around the world and how they got into this situation in the first place. But with another one, which is where Carl and Lee, where the Shattered Lands, where the Streets of Mir campaign is, that takes place in the Shattered Lands, which is basically it's like a planet that broke apart due to some cataclysm or another, and people get around on airships to these like floating islands, and how it's all staying together is a mystery. But it's set in that city of Mir, which is the biggest city in the whole area, and it's got the layers. It's because it's set in a mount. It's built into a mountain, so you've got the lower tier, which is where most of the people are, and then it kind of the less and less people go up, inhabit as you go up, and it also gets more and more wealthy as you go up. So it's like
oh yeah.
So I had that that kind of was a concept, I guess. It started off as a concept, and then they started off in tier 7, the lowest tier, and they're trying to kind of assist people down there. And then the concept originally was they're going to go up and up and up and up and up until they're at the top. That concept has altered slightly because of how their characters interacted and how their characters interacted with the world around them.
Yeah, I was going to have a question of, if you've gone through the trouble of creating this world, but then your players, like, and you have certain ideas of, there's certain areas of the world that you're hoping they get to or whatever, but maybe they don't, like, is that kind of disappointing? Or do you, as the DM, try to guide them there eventually? Or like, if there's something you really have in store for them,
Well, in Streets of Mir, part of the reason, it's kind of a fact of it being something we record and put out, is that it's quite episodic. So if they don't get to something now, well, we can seed it in later and see if you go for it then. In a game itself, it's a lot of, it's kind of a lot of adaptation. So if they miss something there, it's like, okay, that's cool. I can bring this, I can kind of bank this and bring it back later when they need to go, when they're going somewhere, and maybe, oh, let's go into the cave. It's like, okay, well, they don't have any plan for the cave, but they missed this earlier, so I can go bring it around and maybe upscale things a bit, and now you have a thing to do in the cave. If that makes sense. It's like it's almost modular. Like you chop and change and bring things around.
How do you keep track of that? Are you like, do you have notes? Do you have a computer spreadsheet? Like, how are you keeping track of those modules?
I have so many notebooks. So many notebooks. And that's an inefficient way to do it, I think. I think a spreadsheet or something with like hyperlinks would be way easier. But I am in some ways a granddad, and I do like getting a pen and paper and like just scribbling out a few ideas on there. And
so you're like flipping through your notebooks, like they're going to the cave, but they don't have this part.
Kinda, yeah, kinda. It got.
I can see it. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a moment in And I know they watch this, so I'm not mad at you, but it was just funny. They so there's in one of the games I'm doing, we went back in time to this war that was going on. It's sort of like World War II Battle of the Bulge type vibe, and it's very kind of like very cold, kind of like a horror vibe. And there was a point where the enemy attacked them, and they had to go. They were like getting out the foxholes and like engaging the enemy, and like they were crushing it. They were doing really well, and they were like, "Okay, we're going onward. We're gonna go right up to their lines." And I'm like, "Oh no!" I'm like, and I had to go like.
What were they supposed to do, or what did you want them to do?
So, well, I sort of had to remind them why they were there, because they had a time crunch, but because they crushed it, and they crushed it so well, it was like, yeah, we can take the fight to the enemy, and we can just do that now. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's an issue, because they have a very clear time crunch as well, and I had to remind them about the time crunch.
Okay.
And also I had to do that because, and I said to them, I was like, please don't make me pull a war out of my ass, please. Like
you weren't ready for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's my own fault in a way for like going like, hey, there's a war. And it's like, okay, let's fight the war. No, don't. Don't fight the war. You're not meant to fight the war. Oh no.
They were just
I gave you a
excited.
war. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
They were excited and confident.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you were saying earlier, you've just gotten into role play. Well, I say you just sort of had a foray into role playing.
Yeah, short. Yeah, my son. So my husband and I have a son who's 12. All his friends were watching Stranger Things, so we finally are like, okay, because he's just getting to this age where he's starting to watch things that can be scary and he can handle it, right? So and I haven't seen all of Stranger Things, but he's zipped through all the episodes, and he really was like, what is Dungeons and Dragons? Because that's a big part of that show. And so he wanted to check it out, and he's like, I want to start playing Dungeons and Dragons. That was his first thought. And then I was like, and we're like, okay, because neither his husband or I are really interested in it. I'm not, because like I've got this other world I'm trying to write books. I've already built this world, and if I'm going to spend time telling stories and stuff, I have like a limited time to work on my books and be in that world, because I have a day job, I have a family, so. But the thing is, when you have a kid and they get interested in something, then it becomes worth making that time for, right? Something that you may not have gravitated towards yourself, but if they are interested and they want help with it, then I was like, yeah, I'm totally, here for it. Let's set aside time and try to learn this. And, I have friends at work who play regularly, people, some of the indie authors we know, like Manaya, he plays and stuff. So I kind of reached out, and they're like, the first thing they said was like, you need to join a game with an experienced DM. The best way to learn, because I was so intimidated when I saw what it was, right? And they're like, you need to join a game. That's the best way to learn, is just join a game. And we don't really have the time to do that, or anyone to do that with. So my son and I were like, well, we'll just get the starter kit, and we'll just give it a go and try to learn it. And so I was starting to like look at some videos and start reading up about it. And the starter kit that we got, it's the campaign is the Mines of Philander or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Van Delver or something. I brought it in.
It's something like
that.
Oh
yeah, it's the starter set. So we're like, surely a starter set is good for beginners. So
sort of.
Oh my god. So and unfortunately my son wasn't really like, I'm like, you need to start watching videos too if you really want to get in, you know, you need to see what this is about too. But he was kind of like, so I was the one doing that, and then I was trying to. I'm like, well, I guess I have to be the DM, and like, so we gave it a go, and I didn't realize I should have read like, and there's a lot of material with the starter set, but you really got to read it all, and just there's math and like you know and I didn't understand the number, and like we tried it and I just wasn't prepared, and he was so good about it, like because he'd have to sit there while I was looking stuff up, and he was really good about it. He didn't get frustrated or anything, but I think part of it was I think if he wants to get into it, like, and he sort of lost interest after that. Hopefully it wasn't my fault, but
it's a really difficult thing to just launch into.
Oh yeah, there's the
Yeah.
learning curve. Oh my gosh. And I would totally do it with him if he had that interest. Like if he was also watching videos and really getting into it, I would set aside the time for that. But I'm gonna let him drive that. Like he needs to, if he wants to do it, he needs to be part of that and not just relying on me. And you know, maybe hopefully like there will be a group he can join or something if he's still interested in it. But
yeah.
But I was asking, I felt kind of bad because my coworkers would ask me how it's going, and even Manaya asked me how it was going, and I was like, well, this is what happened, you know, and we kind of lost interest, and he was like, he didn't even answer. He was just like, you know, and they're just like, yeah, like, so I don't know how, like, because I know it's such a big part of people's lives, and like, it's just like my coworker who's been playing it for decades, she was telling me how back in that day in the area she lived, this was like she was in high school, I guess, or no, like the people were accusing them of devil worship and stuff. Like I didn't know that was a thing, and I heard in Stranger Things that show they kind of addressed that, and she wrote an article for her high school newspaper defending Dungeons and Dragons and explaining that it's not devil worship. We're not, you know, and she was telling that story. I thought that was really fascinating. And I mean, did you ever encounter anything like that?
No, this is like the satanic panic stuff, isn't it? Like in the I don't know, like maybe in the 80s or the early 90s, I think.
Yeah, I guess people are much more accepting of it. I mean, it's just maybe it's too new or something that I don't know.
It's sort of exploded into popular culture, partly due to Stranger Things and partly due to like Critical Role and things like that. I would say definitely, I think it's a really interesting way to test out characters. So I would recommend persevering with it a bit, because it is, if you've got kind of if you've got something you kind of want to play with a bit, or like a story you want to play with a bit, like it's a good way to kind of test the boundaries and test what people would do in that environment. And I would recommend watching the Ox Venture for it.
The what's that again? Ox.
The Ox Venture. So the
OX.
So it's the Outside Xbox and Outside Extra channel. So they mainly are like do gaming, but they all decided to start doing D&D, and they all did it as beginners. So it's like a party of like 4 or 5. So they had no idea what was going on, and their DM had, I think, done maybe like 2 or 3 sessions before he DM'd for them. So they're like brand new. So everything is really clearly presented, really clearly set up. Also, I would recommend watching Streets of Mir, just because I have to,
of course,
plug our own stuff. Yeah, but definitely.
Yeah. So what you said about trying out new characters, because I know from listening to Manaya's on your show, and also I knew this before because he had talked about this character before. He had a D&D character, but it became like this huge character for him, and he's writing, and she's going to be in his novels and things, and like, but I think she started in D&D, right? So, and you've talked about having characters that you started in for D&D. So that's an interesting. I almost wouldn't be able to not turn them into something, because when you think of a character, it's like suddenly you get, I don't know if this happens to you, but it's like suddenly they have a backstory, and then you think of their forward story, and you think of, and then they have relatives, and there's stuff, and it's just like your mind just like kind of goes, and the character becomes something that one story isn't enough for, or one tabletop game isn't enough for, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great way. It is a great way to like, play around with stuff, play around with worlds, play around with characters. Yeah, and I definitely recommend. Yeah, recommend giving it the old college try. It's one of those that's very like. Once
it's hard.
Yeah, that's the thing. It needs.
I mean, those character sheets.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, my son was like, I want to create a character, and I'm like, we're using the pre-made character sheets for now. I'm like, just so we start to understand them before you try to, because there's a lot, and it's like front and back, and like all the numbers. I'm sorry, it's just like,
it's a lot of stuff. Yeah, but once you get into it, once like the foundation is laid, it's really it's the good platform. It's a solid platform for things to kind of be created off it. And I heartily recommend it to.
Yeah, I know you do.
Yeah, well, and on that note, I think on that recommendation, I think we'll finish there, because I just looked at the time. So, what we'll do, I'm just going to go ahead and pop this up. So, where can people find you, Leslie? And where can people find your stuff? Aside from here.
The fastest way is probably on my website, which is just simply lesleesheu.com. If you want to find out about the books. And on social media, I'm on Minds, I'm on Instagram, sometimes Twitter, but and all of those are just Leslee Sheu. That's my handle. So, but to find out about the books, you could go. Currently I'm only published through Amazon. That should change soon, but yeah, there's my website. So, and I'm working on book 4. So. Hopefully soon.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I imagine the rest of the people who are eagerly awaiting it are looking forward to it as well. All right, so I can't wait. I can't wait to get back into that world, because it's a really.
Oh, thanks for saying that.
Yeah. So, So, thank you for watching, everybody, and thank you for coming, Leslie.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you, because like I said, I've kind of wanted to talk to you since I read your books last year, and that was a great opportunity. So thank you for that. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And stay tuned for the next one.